Most of the world thought they already knew the story of blood types. Type A, Type B, Type AB, and Type O. Four simple categories that determined whether one person's blood could safely flow into another's. It was basic medical knowledge, the kind of fact you'd find in any high school biology textbook. For decades, Type O was seen as useful, yes, but not extraordinary. It was the universal donor, a blank slate with no antigens on the surface of its red blood cells. Hospitals prized it during emergencies, especially in trauma wards where doctors couldn't afford to waste precious minutes checking for compatibility. But beyond that, it was rarely seen as more than a clinical convenience. Until now. In 2025, an international team of researchers stumbled upon something that would shatter this assumption. What began as routine genetic sequencing turned into one of the most haunting revelations about human history ever uncovered. They found that Type O blood wasn't just a universal donor. It was something far older, stranger, and more significant. The absence of A and B antigens wasn't just a neutral lack of decoration on the blood cell surface. It was a kind of genetic fossil, a time capsule, a hidden story that linked survival, extinction, and catastrophe across continents and millennia. As evidence poured in from archaeological digs, ancient DNA studies, and forgotten immune codes buried in the genome, a chilling picture began to emerge. Type O blood had not merely endured, it had survived something catastrophic enough to erase entire bloodlines from history. And the truth scientists just revealed has left experts stunned. They called it the blood that wouldn't go away. At first, that might sound like a poetic metaphor, but to geneticists poring over thousands of samples, it was a literal fact. In population after population, across the Americas, the Arctic, and even remote Polynesian islands, Type O blood kept showing up, not as a minority, not as part of a mixed genetic picture, but as an overwhelming dominant presence. In some Amazonian tribes, almost every single individual tested carried only Type O. Entire communities existed where A and B blood types had vanished altogether. For years, this was brushed aside as a quirk of evolution. Scientists leaned on convenient explanations: genetic drift, isolation, founder effects, population bottlenecks. These were the comfortable terms that filled journal articles, explanations that sounded reasonable but never fully answered the deeper questions. Because the pattern wasn't random, it was too clean, too absolute, almost purposeful. The more researchers dug, the stranger it became. Why would a blood type so blank, so seemingly simple, become the survivor across vast stretches of geography? Why would A and B vanish entirely from entire continents as if they had been erased by an invisible hand? What they uncovered in 2025 was not just about blood. It was about the hidden scars of ancient survival. Scars written not in bones or artifacts, but in the DNA that still flows through millions of people today. And that was just the beginning. To understand why the 2025 discovery was so staggering, you need to step back and look at what blood types really are. On the surface, it's simple. Type A blood carries the A antigen. Type B blood carries the B antigen. Type AB blood carries both. And Type O blood carries none. That absence is what makes Type O so valuable in medicine. Without antigens, the immune system of the recipient doesn't flare up in alarm, and the transfusion is safe. It's why hospitals stockpile O-negative blood for emergencies. It can go into almost anyone. For decades, that's all it seemed to be, a clinical convenience. But simplicity can be deceiving. In biology, absence often hints at something much older, something primordial. Like a tree that sheds its leaves but keeps the trunk standing firm, the blank slate of type O blood may actually be the root of all blood groups. It could represent the original foundation from which A and B later evolved. This possibility had been floated before, but the new data began to confirm it. Type O wasn't just missing something. It was enduring, stable, resistant to change, even as humanity migrated, intermarried, and adapted to different environments. While other blood groups shifted and diversified, type O held steady, like an ancient echo of the first humans. But if that was true, why was its distribution so strange? Across Europe, Asia, and Africa, the human gene pool looked like a patchwork quilt. A, B, AB, and O all mixed together in varying proportions. Diversity, as expected. But in the Americas, something different was happening. Among indigenous populations, the dominance of type O wasn't just striking, it was almost absolute. In some regions, more than 90% of individuals tested carried it. In others, A and B were missing altogether, as if they had been erased from existence. This wasn't a gentle fading of genetic variety. It looked like a collapse. At first, the easy explanation was isolation. If small groups of migrants crossed into the Americas carrying mostly O alleles, then maybe, over time, that blood type simply took over. But as genetic science grew more advanced, cracks appeared in this theory. Ancient DNA samples from Siberia, the very region where these supposed migrants came from, told a different story. Those Siberian ancestors weren't dominated by O at all. They carried a healthy mix, A, B, AB, and O. Their gene pool was diverse. And yet, when their descendants set foot in the Americas, that diversity vanished. It was as if something had hunted down every trace of A and B, leaving only O standing. This was no longer a story about random chance. It was a story about survival, selective, brutal survival. And if the blood itself could talk, it would whisper of a catastrophe no history book had ever recorded. The scientific community was faced with a haunting question. If the ancestors carried all blood types, what happened to them? Why did A and B disappear almost overnight in the genetic record? The answer, scientists feared, might lie in something deadly, something that swept through early populations with merciless precision, sparing only those with the blank, resilient code of type O. And what they uncovered next cracked the oldest migration story of all. For over a century, anthropology leaned on a single elegant story. The first humans to reach the Americas crossed an icy land bridge called Beringia, which once connected Siberia and Alaska during the last ice age. Sea levels were lower then, exposing a vast frozen plain where small groups of hunter-gatherers could walk across. This theory explained the peopling of the Americas in neat terms. A small founding population crossed over, carrying only a sliver of the genetic diversity found in their Siberian homeland. Over thousands of years, isolation preserved and amplified their traits. And so, type O blood was explained away. If those migrants happened to carry mostly O, then naturally it became dominant in their descendants. For decades, textbooks repeated this. It was comfortable. It was simple. But as genetic science advanced, simplicity began to unravel. When researchers sequenced DNA from Ice Age remains near Lake Baikal in Siberia, dating back 15,000 years, they expected to find a homogeneous pool dominated by O. Instead, they found a mosaic. A, B, AB, and O all present. The ancestors of Native Americans weren't limited to type O. They carried the full range. That meant something didn't add up. If diversity existed before the crossing, why didn't it survive after? Why, upon entering the Americas, did populations suddenly become almost exclusively O? There was no gradual blending, no slow loss of variation. Instead, the genetic record showed something abrupt, an almost instant collapse of bloodline diversity. This raised a terrifying possibility. Either the migrants who crossed were exclusively O carriers, contradicting all evidence from Siberia, or something catastrophic happened after they arrived, wiping out every trace of A and B blood types. The second possibility was far more disturbing. It suggested not just migration, but survival against an unseen force. Theories swirled. Could it have been a pathogen? A disease so precise that it struck down only carriers of A and B? Or an environmental toxin that made O blood a hidden advantage? Was it starvation, climate collapse, or something more mysterious? The more scientists examined the data, the more they saw a pattern of erasure. In ancient Alaskan remains, closer in time to the migration itself, faint traces of A alleles were still present. But moving deeper into the Americas, those alleles vanished completely. Somewhere between Alaska and the Great Plains, diversity disappeared. This wasn't drift, it was selection. Something had acted on these populations with surgical brutality, leaving only type O bloodlines alive. The collapse of the land bridge theory was not just academic. It cracked open the possibility of a forgotten catastrophe, a filter so severe, so merciless, that only one blood type passed through. And if that was true, then buried inside the veins of millions today is the genetic memory of a near-extinction event. But what was it? To find the answer, scientists turned to the bones of the dead. And what they discovered in those remains would shake anthropology to its core. The deeper researchers dug, the stranger the story became. Ancient remains from the Americas told a chilling tale. 10,000 years ago, near modern-day Alaska, DNA showed faint traces of A alleles. 7,000 years ago, deeper into the Americas, those traces were weaker. 5,000 years ago, they were gone. By the time indigenous civilizations rose, from the Olmecs to the Maya, from the Mississippian mound builders to the Inca, their populations were almost exclusively type O. It was as though bloodline diversity had been systematically erased, leaving only one kind of humanity behind. This was not drift, this was purge. But purged by what? The mystery hung in the air for decades. Hypotheses came and went. A virus targeting antigens A and B, a bacterial plague, a selective survival advantage linked to climate or diet. But no evidence held firm until 2025. That year, a joint team of geneticists from Harvard, the Max Planck Institute, and the National Autonomous University of Mexico unveiled something extraordinary. Using ultra-high-resolution genome mapping, they reconstructed the blood profiles of individuals from 12 ancient burial sites across the Americas, spanning a 6,000-year timeline. What they found was not random loss, it was targeted survival. In the earliest remains, individuals with A or B blood markers showed genetic scars, unusual mutations linked to immune collapse. These were signs of populations under attack from a selective force, one that punished their blood chemistry with lethal precision. Meanwhile, individuals with type O blood showed resilience. Their genomes carried no such collapse signatures. Instead, their lineages flourished and spread. The conclusion was inescapable. Something, a pathogen, an environmental pressure, or an unknown agent, struck down carriers of A and B blood, leaving type O as the sole survivors. It wasn't that type O dominated. It was that type O endured. The scientists stopped short of naming the killer. They didn't know what it was, but their study shattered the comfort of the land bridge narrative. Humanity's passage into the Americas wasn't just migration, it was trial by fire, a filter event that nearly erased bloodline diversity forever. And in that moment, the blood running through millions of people today, the O blood that makes them universal donors, was revealed to be something far more profound, a survivor's code. But one haunting question remained. If a catastrophe once stalked humanity's blood, could it happen again?
The 2025 discovery didn't just rewrite history, it rattled medicine. For decades, type O was seen as merely practical, the universal donor, useful in emergencies. But now it was something more. It was a clue. A reminder that humanity's blood had already faced a silent war once before, and that O blood had been the winning strategy. Modern medicine had hints of this all along. During the cholera epidemics, carriers of type O sometimes fared better. In studies of malaria resistance, O blood showed unique survival advantages. Even in the case of COVID-19, statistical noise hinted that type O patients were slightly less likely to suffer severe outcomes. These weren't coincidences, they were echoes, signals of an ancient pattern, one written in blood. And so the new question arose. If something once stalked humanity and nearly erased two blood types from existence, was it gone forever? Or is it still out there, dormant, waiting for the right conditions to return? No one knows. The pathogen, if that's what it was, left no fossil, no trace, only the silence of vanished bloodlines. But science does know this. Humanity carries within it the memory of survival. That blank, resilient code in type O blood isn't just a medical convenience. It's an ancient inheritance, proof that once upon a time, survival itself was selective. And today, as scientists continue to probe the mysteries of the genome, one thought keeps them awake at night. What if the past wasn't an isolated event? What if that filter wasn't unique? What if in some hidden corner of the world, the same force still lingers, watching? Because if history has taught us anything, it's this. Sometimes the greatest threats to humanity don't leave ruins or weapons behind. Sometimes they leave only survivors. And type O blood may be the last whisper of a war we never knew we fought. But this mystery is far from solved. If blood once decided who lived and who perished, what else might our DNA be hiding? In the next episode, we'll uncover another secret buried in our very cells, one that could change how we understand humanity itself.